If you want to support the channel, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Thank you. What's up, everybody? Tricks Ridiculous back with another video, and in this one I've got my updated Harley Quinn build. This is a build that I have been absolutely slaying the mastery climb with. It is absolutely phenomenal. It's a little bit of an updated twist on my earlier Harley build, but definitely much more min-maxed and ready for endgame. And you'll see in the gameplay that I'm playing when I get to that part, or feel free to skip ahead in the video. This build absolutely crushes everything in its path. Nothing stands a chance. I'm playing it in the 70s at the time of this video. I think the footage is like 75, 76. I'm already well into the 90s. That gameplay footage is before I really started grinding. I'm telling you, this build is absolutely insane. So I'm going to go over it as I tend to do. I'll go over each piece, why I chose each piece, go over the skill tree briefly, explain this squad talents, and then I will leave you guys with just some raw gameplay so you can see that in action. I'll have timestamps in the video if you want to jump ahead to that. But before we get into it, be sure to like the video if you like build videos, and subscribe if you want more endgame Suicide Squad content and you're not already subscribed. But otherwise, let's jump right into it. It's a pretty straightforward build, but the pieces, I'll kind of explain how they all interwork. Basically, we're using the Tier 3 Bane set, which is the traversal one, but we're not really using it for traversal. You'll be surprised how few traversal attacks we actually do, but having all three is extremely powerful. So we're going to be using that, and we're going to be using just one of the tier 1 pieces, all right? And that's going to be in this death rattle. So you'll notice my two guns here, both SMGs. I have a master pain machine, and as always with these builds, the master versions of your grenade and melee and firearms and shield are nice to have. They're not mandatory to actually make the build work, but if and when you do get a master version of a piece like this, just use it. It just has higher base stats. So you'll notice all of my gear is master, but if yours isn't, that does not mean you can't still copy this build. Just use the non-master versions. But I've got a pain machine here. This is my primary source of damage. This is my primary gun that we're going to be using. It's not our primary source of damage, but basically using the pain machine, crit hit, crit damage, and then damage to infused. I have a death rattle here, but we don't ever use the death rattle. We primarily use the pain machine if we're going to fire a gun at all. We don't really fire our gun too much, so these are mostly just stat sticks. But in general, if you ever are firing your gun, it's going to be the pain machine. The death rattle is really just there for the one piece Bane set bonus, but this build really focuses around grenades. It's really a grenade build. The more grenades, the better. You really can't have enough of them. And then it really uses melee to kind of get that back up and running, right? So we're going to be using the Master Two-Face Persuader. Now this one, of course, has every melee hit on a crazed enemy has a 50% chance to drop either a live grenade or grenade ammo at the enemy's feet. And then the True Face of Fury is that harvesting enemies now has a 100% chance of dropping grenade ammo and increases grenade damage by 100 for 20 seconds. And pair that with the tier 1 one piece bonus of the Bane's Rage set, which is each melee hit on an enemy has a 50% chance to craze it and a 50% chance to drop grenade ammo. So figure it like this, and keep in mind, suicide strikes do count as melee hits. So each melee hit has a 50% chance to craze, 50% chance to drop ammo, and then if they're crazed, another 50% chance to drop either more ammo or a live grenade, plus if it's a harvest, on top of all of that, it's a 100% chance for a grenade. So when we're not throwing grenades, we're going to be spamming our melee quite a bit, okay? So that's really the build. You'll see from the gameplay, I fire the guns a little bit, but for the most part, I'm spamming grenades, spamming suicide strikes, spamming shield harvests where I can get them, and then basically just meleeing to get more grenades back. All right, now for the grenade itself, we're using a Master Reign of Bane. This is really the most important piece. If any piece in the build can be a masterpiece, it's got to be this one, because it's just going to be flat out more damage. Now, the way you have this rolled is the most important, all right? And first things first, just for both of these afflictions, it's Venom Frenzy across the board, right? Because we're using the tier 3 Bane set, having crazed enemies and damage to crazed enemies is just going to be what we want. We're not really going crazy, pun intended, crazing people, but it will just happen naturally over the course of how we play. So all these bonuses to crazed are just the best things we can put on. So having just Venom Frenzy across the board. But in terms of what you want on this grenade, it is a cluster grenade. I don't think I've seen this drop other than a cluster, but if you do get it as not a cluster, you don't want it. It has to be a cluster grenade. That's going to be the best DPS and the best for all of the perks that we have going here. So we've got explosion radius, which Harley already gets a good amount of explosion radius, and the seasonal modifier gives 100% explosion radius to all grenades just by default. So grenades this season are just absolutely very strong. Obviously, when that seasonal modifier goes away, some of this will scale back a bit, but I still think it'll be pretty powerful. So you're going to have some extra explosion radius. That's the best in slot for the green perk. For the blue perk, really important, 2% shield regenerate for each enemy hit with a grenade, all right? I can't stress how important this is. There are other perks here that are good, but this is the best perk, all right? Especially because this is a cluster grenade, 2%, and you really want to make sure you get that max roll of 2%. For every enemy hit with the grenade, if you throw one, if you're completely absolute, you're one shot, you throw a grenade into doesn't even have to be a lot of enemies, 2, 3 enemies, the cluster, you'll see a ton of damage numbers on all those enemies. The clusters with the AoE, the explosion radius, every grenade is going to hit each of those enemies 12 times. Plus, Harley, as you know, Harley, every time a grenade hits, has the ability to drop an extra grenade. Your shield is literally going to go, you're going to go from completely dead to max shield plus max overcharge shield from one grenade throw. So this is not only our primary source of damage, but it's also our primary source of survivability. It is absolutely, you'll see in the gameplay how when I throw grenades, especially when I'm low shield, my shield just whoops right back up to the top. It's absolutely insane. All right, and then of course, grenade damage to crazed enemies, that goes without saying. Now coming over to the shield, we're using a Master Unstoppable. That is the tier 3 Bane set. This does have the perk that when there are 4 more enemies within 20 meters of you, you deal 100% more damage and take 50% less. That does happen quite a bit. We do get that bonus pretty regularly, so it is good to have this. Some people are still using the turtle shield for that traversal damage reduction. That did get nerfed, so it's not as good anymore. I think, especially to keep the Bane set, this is the one to have here. But we got crit hit chance. We have shield harvest chance because shield harvest is pretty powerful, especially with the villain synergy from the 2 Faces Persuader. That harvesting enemies gives 100% chance of dropping grenade ammo and boosting our grenade damage. A little extra shield harvest chance, I think, goes a long way. You'll notice there's going to be a lot of shield harvestable enemies. We'll be able to really wreck them and just be constantly flowing in grenades. And then electrified resistance, this is just my personal preference. I like to max out my electrified resistance. You don't have to do this. If you feel like it's not a problem for you, you can certainly go with just more damage to crazed enemies in that slot. But for me, I think it's worth it to max out your electrified resistance. And you'll see I do have it completely maxed out through this and the talent tree. But this is how I'm rocking it. I'm using a Master Turtle Steel Force Conduit. Of course, this just gives you a flat 500% increased damage as long as you're moving constantly, which of course we will be. And then for this, really, damage to grunts, damage to brutes, pretty straightforward. And then that purple perk there, I'm using damage to enemies that are within 5 meters. Now, the other thing you could use is damage to enemies that are further than 25 meters. And honestly, both of these perks are very good. I've flipped back and forth. Both of them that I've used, I haven't really seen one be significantly worse. This one affects your shield harvests, obviously, and your suicide strikes, right? Because you're going to be so close, as well as your traversal attack, at least for the enemy that you hit with it. And then a lot of times you'll notice after you do a takedown or after you do a shield strike, or shield harvest, I should say, you tend to like just kind of throw a grenade just in your general area and it'll just hit everything around you. So those enemies within that 5 meters are definitely all going to kind of count for that. But certainly if you're looking to play a little bit more of a high wire build where you're going to be kind of staying on top of enemies, kind of staying on top of rooftops and just throwing grenades down, you can go with that 25%. Play around with it, see what you like better. There's really neither of them make or break the build. I tend to find the 5 meter one is a little bit better because I'm really in there spamming melees while I'm throwing grenades. I never tend to really get out of the fight. And you'll see in the gameplay how just staying in the fight, meleeing, shield harvesting, takedowns, and then spamming your grenades is going to keep you topped up on shield and health, right? So you're not going to have to worry about like running away and things like that. All right, and then we're using Hugo Strange's specialization. This one, after afflicting 5 enemies with the same affliction, you're immune to damage from that enemies with that affliction for 20 seconds. So this does come in handy. Like I said, we're going to be afflicting quite a few people with craze. It's not, as far as an immunity, it's not quite as good as something like the old turtle shell or the old molten skin that got nerfed, but because it only gives you immunity from those crazed enemies, but it is still good. And it also affects, if you, let's say you do a suicide strike on a crazed enemy or a shield harvest, or you just throw a grenade at them and they explode, that boom modifier, you are immune to that if they were a crazed enemy that died. So it is helpful in that sense. We're really also using it for the villain synergy, the Bane, Hugo Strange, rage itself. Every time you craze an enemy, you get 50% increased damage flat for 30 seconds to a maximum of 250. We're pretty much always going to be at 250 with this, so you don't have to really worry about it. So a really just good offensive defensive bonus here. Definitely the best in slot just for the neck bomb mod. There's really not a better one. And then I'm going with, again, electrified resistance just to cap that off. Grenade damage on brute enemies and then damage to crazed. And then Jinx's lucky coin. I think you all know this one. For this, I'm going with pickup radius. For me, I think this one's really underrated, especially for Harley. There's not too many good slots or good perks in this particular slot, the green lucky charm slot, but pickup radius I think is pretty solid for Harley, especially when grenades drop elsewhere in the map. And Harley, we know, doesn't have the best traversal, so having a little extra pickup radius to be able to just kind of snag those grenades on your way by is actually pretty helpful for just a throwaway perk for the most part, right? Electrified resistance and then damage to crazed. So you'll notice in my overall stats, I've got exactly 100% live wire bolt resistance. And then we've just got, pretty much damage, right? Damage to crazed, and then just getting a lot of damage from our grenades. And I'll show you the talents really quick. And let me get my head out of the way here. But basically, these are the talents. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you just want to make sure you use these here. This has been optimized specifically for grenade builds, and really, like, the two that I would say are like the most important. Grenades have a 25% chance to spawn an additional live grenade. Extremely powerful, right? You definitely want to make sure you get the grenade explosion radius and grenade ammo capacity up by 1. And then the one that I really like is Clown Smackdown, which is any kill generates 10% suicide strike resource. So you're going to actually be getting your suicide strike back quite a bit. And the thing about Harley, you really don't have to worry about using your suicide strike. I know for a lot of characters that aren't specifically deadshot, it can be a little risky to use your suicide strike because it's so close range with that boom modifier. However, the thing about Harley's is hers gives shield pickups. Not everyone gives shield pickups. So when you do a suicide strike, even if it kills the enemy, you will get shield back before the boom modifier. So the boom modifier alone will never kill you. It'll usually leave you at like 1 health. So you have to just throw a grenade at your feet and then heal from that. But it'll never kill you outright as it would for some other characters. So you can definitely use your suicide strike pretty liberally as Harley just because of how hers works. And same thing with, shield harvesting, because you get that shield harvest energy back. It's not going to affect you when they do explode. The other thing, just as a major aside to this, is the devs have already said that they're going to modify the boom modifier. They're going to nerf it essentially so that it does not trigger on suicide strike kills or shield harvest kills. So when that does happen, the build will be even better because of that. But even without that, it's totally fine. So that's pretty much the build. And like I said, just the general gameplay loop of this build is you just want to basically spam all of your abilities off cooldown, right? Use your traversal attack as soon as you can. Use your squad ultimate as soon as you can. Use your suicide strike on the first enemy you can. And then just spam your grenades, spam your melee to get back your grenades, and that's it. You'll notice you'll be doing so much damage, and you'll just be consistently healed from just throwing grenades. And you really just can't throw enough grenades. And I'll just go over, I forgot to go over the actual talents here really quick, but this is what I have. Really the most important things: crit hit chance is good. Not the most important, but definitely worth having. Grenade drop chance, you don't really need this, but it is helpful. Especially for a small investment of 20 points to get an extra 10. The reason I say you don't absolutely need this is because a lot of the stuff we have is pretty set, where like, you know, a melee hit is a 50% chance to drop a grenade, right? Or shield harvesting is a 100% chance. So regardless of your grenade drop chance, you're gonna get grenades no matter what. But like I said with this build, there's no amount of grenades that is too many grenades. The more grenades you get, the better, because you can just keep throwing them. So a little extra grenade drop chance is certainly helpful. Grenade damage, right? That's a kind of a no-brainer with this build. And then we're just doing flat damage to brutes, damage to grunts. This is the best bang for your buck because they're only 20 points each. You get essentially a flat 20% damage across the board. You can go for damage to craze, but for 40 points, you know, to get the same 20%, and it's more conditional, I'm personally not a fan of that. I go with a little bit of damage reduction to both of them. Just especially the one from brutes is more important because of the explosions. But just having that across the board is pretty nice. And then I go with 10 electrified resistance just to cap myself off. I already have 40% from the shield, 20% from the neck bomb, and then 30% from the lucky charm. So that's 90. So it only takes me another 10 to get it up to exactly 100%. That way I'm never actually electrified from snipers or weather effects, things like that. And then the last thing I try to go for here is a little more shield harvest chance. Like I said, we have 15% just on our gear, and then an additional 10%, ideally 20% once we level this up. But it's really nice to just have shield harvest, especially once they get rid of the boom modifier for it. It'll be even better. But pretty much exactly this. You'll just be shield harvesting enemies left and right. Because it's a 100% chance to get a grenade from it, you do want to have as much shield harvest as possible, and then that'll just really cap off your grenades. But that's the build. That's it, guys. Obviously, if you have any questions about it, be sure to leave it down in the comments below. I hope you enjoy. Like I said, this build, if you do want to kind of copy it exactly, I promise you, just play it the way you see me playing it in the video, and you will absolutely fly through the mastery ranks. This is absolutely an S-tier build, and it's a little different than what we've seen, you know. Even I'm guilty of it myself, of just, you know, traversal attack builds seem to be kind of what everyone's playing these days. So Grenade Harley, little bit different, but absolutely an S-tier build there as well. But I'll leave you with some gameplay. If you enjoyed the breakdown, you enjoy these types of videos, be sure to like, and of course, if you're new, subscribe to the channel for more Suicide Squad content. But that is it from me, guys. Enjoy the gameplay, and I'll see you in the next one.